Hello, my name is Taeshi Kim, and I'm an assistant professor of the media studies and journalism at Masaryk University in the Czech Republic. And today I'm going to talk about the relationship between the technological changes, and the changing environment of urban communication. I'm mainly doing my research about urban communication and visual communication, and I try to integrate these two communication disciplines to talk about how people make communication in urban spaces, and also how our urban spaces are represented on the media, and how these urban communication practices can reveal the discourses driven in our everyday life. Yeah, that's my research interest. But yeah, this presentation is mainly based on not based on my current research project, because I don't know much about the technology, like the artificial intelligence. Yeah, so but as an urban communication scholar, I'm also interested in how would these technological changes affect our urban practices. So I'm going to generally ask some questions, or raise some questions instead of answer the question today. So, okay, let me share the slide here. And as you see, the title is my presentation is titled "Walking in the City in the Age of Artificial Intelligence." Actually, I borrowed this title from the art of the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, written by Walter Benjamin. And Walter Benjamin's book, actually, Walter Benjamin mainly spoke about the authenticity of the changing authenticity of art in the early 20th century, um, and it was about the relationship between the technological changes and the mode of production, the changing mode of production in the early 20th century, and how these things have shaped our culture and art. So I also want to see how the technological changes may shape our urban spaces. For example, like the our urban spaces also have been changed by the technologies. For example, in the early in the mid 20th century, many skyscrapers and interstate highways and big suburban residential areas were constructed in the United States, and people have very different ideas about using the urban spaces because of these technological changes. It was very similar to the mass production of culture, like Hollywood system, and this mass production, the cultural mass production of culture, has changed our way of using the media, and our way of appropriating and culture. So that is why I title this presentation like this, borrowing from the Walter Benjamin. So okay, and like walking in the city, actually walking in the city is the chapter from the practices of everyday life, written by Michel de Certeau, and he basically compared the two different urban practices. And the first one is seeing from the top of the building, like seeing Manhattan from the Empire State Building, or the World Trade Center, which is collapsed. And but and it's a very different viewpoint. Like, so it is quite separated from the everyday scene. Like we see the city like a Lego block. But act of walking is to the urban system what the speech act is to language. So basically, he said walking is communication. Walking is a basic means of communication in our space. So walking is very important process interpreting our the interpreting happenings around us in our space. So walking is a kind of seeing social dramas in our everyday life. So then, and by walking, we make a lifestyle. We um, we interpret the social economic conditions in our urban spaces. Also, we can find the structure of demographic compositions and so on. And so we can easily detect, recognize the centrality and marginality of our everyday spaces by walking the street. So, and there is another concept to understand how our urban spaces are based on our everyday life. And Henri Lefebvre wrote a book, which is the title of which title is the production of space, and space is basically produced one according to him. And our space is a social space, and social space is made up of three different kinds of subset, like perceived space and conceived space and lived space. And perceived space is special practices of what we are doing in the space, and conceived space is planned spaces, like it's planned by urban planners and architects. And lived spaces is representational spaces. Actually, we live the space as a passive users, and we comply with the logic of the space. And so these three things are combined into one concept of social space. Okay, let me. So social space is not just a value neutral or objective space, which social space is a very interactive space. It's mutually shaped space. So it is the constantly moving, changing, floating space. But we generally perceive space as a kind of physical, objective, and fixed space. But it's a very flexible one. And we actually interpret the space by using it by ourselves. So our usage, our everyday use, our everyday operation is the key component of our social space. But our world has changed a lot because of the communication technologies. So I said I here subtitled like walking in the city in the age of mobile communication, and our urban practices have changed a lot because of this. Generally we are looking for Wi-Fi connections in everyday life, and also our moving flow and walking flow are guided by GPS navigation system, and we use a lot. And Also, we use a lot of location-based social media like Instagram and Foursquare and so on, and also we use a geotagging system, and but these things all reflect our cultural taste and our like represented images of media. So we actually leave the space, but at the same time we are framed by the by our mobile like communication practices. So media, like various media, including social media and traditional media, have shaped our sense of place. So this is a very radical changes. And so we process information about the urban spaces by using the media and by the information provided by the media, and we have a sense of the like imaginary the special imaginaries by using the media and by consuming the media. But our urban landscape is not that simple, because we see the urban landscape. Actually, this is my research area, and we see the urban landscape every day, every moment, right? And but like urban landscape is not a very objective one. It's not a value neutral one, yeah, right? Because urban landscape is made up of three different things like a built environment and visual materials and human interactions, and they are combined into one big urban landscape. But this is not a very value neutral. This is a very discursive one, and we see what we want to see, and how we define what we want to see. Actually, we are determined. We are affected by the dominant values and dominant discursive power. And so place is always very discursive, and our landscape is determined by ways of seeing, and the ways of seeing is dependent on our lifestyle and our the life orientations and so on, and these are actually affected by our big discursive system. So that's the urban landscape. And so there are two different kind of urban landscapes in general. And the first one is vernacular landscape. It is a very authentic landscape. We actually expresses ourselves in the streets. Then we actually create one collective identity in the place. And by walking in the street, we interpret this collective identity, because these things are very expressive, but it's very ignorable and also unnoticeable in our everyday life. We just pass the street and we don't consciously recognize things. But actually we unconsciously consume these expressive signs, and so we know the meaning of the place and we know the meaning of the space all the time. So that's why we in our everyday conversation we said, don't go there, it's dangerous, it's dirty, it's sketchy, and it's not good place for you. Why? How? Because we already process the information, we interpret the information by consuming these expressive signs. So this is vernacular landscape. On the other hand, commercial landscapes are typically formed mainly with the commodified cultures and commercial brands and commercial activities and consumable places. So in our urban experiences, the commercial landscapes generally become dominant landscapes, mainly due to its profitability. And visual representation of commercial activities are the main contributor in shaping the dominant landscapes. The visually represented places are also very visible on various media platforms. Thus, commercial landscapes become representative visual images in a given urban place. And people easily consume these images on the media, and the images of the given place are typically appropriated by media users. So we reflect our cultural taste in our using images on the media, and the taste is getting stronger as we are repeatedly exposed to the represented images that are favorably produced by the media. So we circulate those images on the social media, which becomes a very profitable data set. In the meantime, we often perceive our everyday space by consuming represented images of the media. So my first question on the relation between urban space and AI is raised here. So how would it be if AI integrated media extensively process urban images in a certain way, which is dependent on the dominant value of a given society? So let me repeat. So how would it be if AI integrated media extensively process urban images in a certain way, which is dependent on the dominant value of a given society? So we can we can also see the dominant discourses placed in our urban spaces from various discussions about smart city too. So the discussion about smart city is generally based on conceived space in Lefebvre's concept of a social space. So it is designed by urban planners and technocrats and architects and so on and so on. And the main discourses of smart cities are safety, convenience, privacy, security, efficiency, sustainability, environment, society, economy, infrastructure, and digital technologies, and so on and so on. And it seems to cover a wide variety of discourses that reflect our urban lives. However, this still leaves a question. How will our social space be produced in the age of AI? And how will our walking as basic means of communication be directed by the technology? And how will we experience our everyday space? And how will we perceive our everyday life spaces? And these are my questions in relation to the emerging technologies of artificial intelligence. So let me briefly summarize this presentation. Yeah, this is a very, quite not organized very well, but the first question is about the representation. How our media, how our urban spaces are well represented in the AI integrated media. The representation, there are two different kinds of representation of our urban spaces, and the first one is authentic representation, like our own expressive represented by our own expressive sign. But at the same time, another representation is the media representation. Our urban spaces are represented by the media, and the media has a very specific cultural taste because of profitability. So how the media, the profitable media, and data-driven media will shape our the urban spaces, and how our urban spaces are represented by this kind of a profitable media. That's my first question. And the second question is our perception of urban spaces. How the technologies can shape our our urban practices, and how these changing urban practices can change our perception of urban spaces. So yeah, these questions are all interrelated. But yeah, today I just try to raise a question which is theoretically relevant in the future, and so maybe I can have much discussion about this together. Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe please share your opinion and comments and concern and questions too. Thank you. Bye.